Adam Basanta, take one. Well, I think sound and space are really connected. Sound tells us a lot about space, and I always feel like it's very hard to pull one away from the other. In fact, it's only possible with technology to do this. And I feel like in my work, I'm really interested in combining the two and making space more audible. And this is something that is kind of different than what I did with composition technologies. So it's a way of making sound very real and physical. So the three pieces at MoTA, one is called Align Listening to Itself. It's a feedback piece, feedback installation, where I create controlled feedback loops between the microphone and 7 speakers. And it's kind of a way in which the sound is self-generating, using feedback, but also very harmonious and very different than our normal experience of feedback. The second piece is called Message Past Future. It's a piece for 3 tape recorders and modified cassette tapes. And in this piece, I recorded a sentence that I found from an old business manual. The sentence is, "The only thing we know about the future is that it's going to be different." And I recorded the sentence with a lot of space between each word, so that as the tape loops are moving around, the sentence is deconstructed and reconstructed in different ways. The third piece is something that I made here at MoTA. I think very fitting that it's the last show in the space. I wanted to make something that's of the space. It's called Outside In, and it's part of a series of experiments I'm doing where I create these acoustic environments that are isolated. So I took some glass casing that I found here, and I put it next to the window, and I put a few microphones inside the glass case. So it's its own kind of acoustic ecosystem with its own resonance, again, the sound and space coming together. And it amplifies a lot of sounds from the outside, buses, people walking, talking next to the window, and sends it to an amplifier that I found here at MoTA, which also adds its own sonic character to the work. And it just lets us experience sounds from the outside, using all these analog or physical processing techniques, acoustic resonance, electronic amplification, malfunctioning equipment, and so there's something familiar about the sounds, but at the same time they are changed in some way. And the fact that the work is staged in a kind of dramatic way, it lets us kind of pause and listen to the sounds in a way that we usually just ignore them. It's just traffic or something like this. In terms of the cassette tapes, I'm interested in a lot of antiquated technology, of course, because I think sometimes when we work with technology that's new, it's hard to be critical about it because it's new, and it's almost that when you see technology from the past, you have a little bit more distance. You can reflect on what it was like to use that technology then, and then what it means to use this technology now. And I feel like there's a bit more awareness of the tools that are being used. I'm interested in cassette tapes specifically because that was my first medium to experience music. So I didn't grow up with vinyls, I grew up with cassette tapes and making mixtapes and recording off of the radio songs so then you can listen to them later. So this was my first experience. And then later, one of the first creative experiences with music and technology was through 4-track cassette tape recorders. So the cassette was something that I had in my life for a long time, and then as soon as I started working with computers, I left it behind, and I've started kind of rediscovering it in the past few years. It's also kind of interesting because I think, as opposed to reel players, as opposed to vinyl, cassette tapes are only starting to get this kind of vintage quality, this romantic quality. Because it's only now that the generation that grew up with cassette tapes is becoming nostalgic about it. And that's sometimes also very practical. They're very cheap and light and small. But it's also, I feel like, there's not a lot of work that has been made with cassette tapes. There's been people doing performances with cassette tapes, but not so much installations. So it became a very interesting kind of medium to work with. And of course, it's just anytime you have a recorded technology, it becomes very interesting in an art context, because the recording itself sort of allows the past to come into the present, or the present to go into the future. But it also immediately tells us that the recording comes from a certain time, because we hear the certain quality of the cassette tape, the warble of the cassette, so this is, it becomes very poetic, I think, and for me the cassette tape is like, it's also something that I remember, so it's extra special. Usually when I come up with an idea for a piece, it's something that makes me laugh a little bit. This is just how I think about making work. And I mean, they're kind of sad jokes. They're kind of, there's a melancholy in the joke, but there's also some humor. And a lot of time I find that I try to create absurd situations, situations that don't make sense from a technical point of view, like putting a microphone inside a glass case, or recording cassette loops, or working with feedback. They're all kind of errors. They're things we try to avoid usually. And by putting these objects in the absurd situation, I think people are able to listen to the objects in a way that they can't when they're used in a kind of normative sense. When something is used in a normative sense, it's just a tool and it becomes invisible. But when you point the microphone at the speaker, all of a sudden this weird situation becomes, you become aware that the microphone is, and the speaker, they're both parts of the sound production process. They're collaborators in every sound production that we have today. So I'm very interested in approaching it with a little bit of humor, with a little bit of absurdity, and because it's just, I find when the art is too serious, it's also interests me a bit less. I don't try to make a overt political point in the works, but there's politics involved in making the work. For me, I feel like somebody who grew up playing music, grew up playing in bands. I've bought a lot of equipment over the years. This has been something that we all do, and yet I don't particularly agree with the way this industry works. All these machines are being made often in terrible conditions, in places that are very far away, and we don't have to think about it. At the same time, there's something very funny about buying equipment, the brand name, the price difference because of reputation, for instance, or things that I don't particularly like, and yet I need to use this equipment all the time. So that's kind of how the absurd situations also come into it. I'm in a way trying to use these materials in this wrong way, in a way that's that's against their original function. And in that way, it's a little bit interfering with the economic function, with the political function. There's also, especially in aligned listening to itself, I think there is a sense where amplification is a form of power dynamics. To amplify something is to give it a power to be heard, and usually we amplify things that are important, and somebody speaking or a musical instrument or something like this, and by turning a microphone against a speaker and creating feedback, or amplifying sounds of the outside, it's kind of shifting this power dynamic. It's amplifying sounds that are not really, that are not meant to be amplified, that are not important, and kind of puts them in new light, and again disables the normative function of the equipment. So in that sense, there's a small political statement there, but again, it's done in a humorous way. Of course, there is the idea of transforming somebody's hearing or somebody's listening or way of listening is something that's central to all the pieces, central to all my work. But at the same time, it's also about transforming the way people look at objects and the way people look at obsolete objects. You know, we buy and we throw things all the time, and a lot of the materials I use are found materials. The speakers used in aligned listening to itself are mostly garbage or things I find, for very cheap because they're not wanted anymore. So it's also transforming maybe the way that we look at the objects themselves, the way that we look at the consumption practice a little bit.
Thing. No.
They do intervene sometimes. I find every year, the more I work with sound art, it changes my music. It makes me think differently about music. The same way that I'm speaking about the microphone and the tape recorder, you can apply this to the performer, to the instrument. So I think my music is more, I reflect more about what it means to write music. And what are the power dynamics when I give a performer a score, and what is the power dynamics when a performer plays an instrument? How does the audience relate to it? So I think about music in a much wider sense than I did a few years ago, I think. But the two are different for me, and I think the difference is not only the more attention to visual elements, but also to space and to the way that time works. I think time works very differently in a concert. I know people are going to sit down and listen to the beginning, middle, and end, and hopefully pay attention throughout the whole time. So you can approach the construction of sound in time with this very stable platform. And in sound art, it's not stable. People can come in for 5 minutes, they can look at the pieces in one order or in another. They can stay for 40 minutes. So I try to kind of balance, have some sort of compositional dynamic in the works themselves, and have a compositional dynamic to the way that works interrelate to one another. So in the show here at MoTA, there's one piece that you can listen to for an hour and it won't repeat. And then there are shorter statements, shorter songs. Maybe the Message Past Future and Outside In are both short statements that kind of interrupt the longer piece. So I still think about these issues from the point of view of a composer, but I'm thinking about composing with not just with sound, but also with space, with sculptural elements. We listen very differently when when it's a sculpture, we stand around it. You know, we listen very differently when it's an immersive installation than we walk around. So, to me, this is composition. It's just outside of concert music composition, but I use the same approach, really.
Mm-hmm. Last question. There are many.
I'll say actually one more thing. One more thing is that I like about sound art is it lets me compose with the title, the concept a little bit more than in music. I find in music you can do this to some degree, but I don't think people listen this way in a concert. And sound art gives this opportunity to give a title and to say this is a very particular kind of object and a very particular kind of concept. And I'm very interested in the way that the concept relates to the sound and the way that the two interact. And I can play with the way people listen this way in a way that I haven't been able to in music. Yeah, I mean, you're referring to Seth Kim-Cohen kind of against ambience. I think it's an interesting argument that he's making. Personally, I feel that I think sound art is really unique in the sense that I like sound art that addresses some sort of political or conceptual concerns. And combines it with something that sounds really interesting, that still has the kind of sensual and sensory kind of beauty that we have in listening to music. For me, this is a very interesting combination, and I'm less interested in sound art that only does one of the two. I'm interested in sound art that is combining the two, and in that sense, I think it's very, very different than a lot of contemporary artwork. So I feel like the idea that sound creates ambience, I do find a bit problematic. Like I don't want my sound art to be kind of the sonic equivalent to op art. I want it to be more than that. But I think that for me it's about this interrelation between the listening to sounds, which doesn't require a concept and doesn't require political statement or something like that, and to combine that with the more visual art, conceptual approach. To me, when it's not in combination, there's something missing. Yeah. Did you read the book, The Seth Kim-Cohen? No, me neither. Not yet. Not yet. It's funny because I feel like he makes really good points in both his books. But for me, he's a little bit too far to one end. I feel he goes a bit too far for me.
But you know, even if people, let's say in contemporary art, if there is a, I don't know what critique of whatever, and it's painted, then this is kind of approved. Like,
right.
It has a, and if it's expressed in sounds, people don't get it. Like general audience, you know, even in contemporary art.
Yeah.
So that's really, it's a funny situation. I mean, it's ocular-centric culture. That's
of course.
why. But but you.
But I think it's also changing. I think there's a lot more sound art now than there was 5 years ago.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We'll see what happens. I hope there's more.
Thanks.